The second task of mourning is to process the pain of grief. It is nearly impossible to lose someone that you love or something that you're attached to without experiencing some kind of level of pain. Our experiences of the faith in our parishes are tied strongly to our communities, where many of you have lived for a very long time. And even if the faith itself isn't changing through this process, some of our practical outward experiences of our practice of it will change. So for example, maybe you won't be able to attend Mass at a certain time that you always did, or in the church building that you always did. Well, I can't sit in my pew. And it's okay to grieve what you might miss from your previous experience of something like Sunday Mass. I want to acknowledge that this experience of pain is something that is normal in a grieving process. Whatever kind of emotional responses that we have, emotions in of themselves aren't good or bad. They're morally neutral. We might not even be able to choose our initial reaction that we have to things, but we can choose what to do with our emotions, because what we choose to do with them can be good or bad, perhaps even sinful. We want to direct our emotions toward a virtuous life and ultimately towards flourishing. There are a number of different emotions that can arise as we try to process the pain of our grief. And so let's talk about a few of those. The first is that of anger. Anger can come from frustration and a sense of helplessness. If we're facing a loss that we can't control, we can be frustrated and angry about the situation. Anger might be very outward and explosive, or it might simply be silently passive-aggressive. Sometimes our anger can be directed towards the wrong persons, lashing out at maybe a family member who really doesn't deserve it. In the case of our pastoral planning, perhaps towards the archbishop, or to the archdiocesan planning team, or towards our priests or pastors. Anger can sometimes lead to even making irrational statements or behaviors. I'm not going to donate to my parish if we don't have a Mass. Of course, that's not really a logical response, since it will simply lead the parish even more quickly towards the potential closure. But those kinds of things can be expressions of frustration, a feeling of helplessness, like what else can I do? As we engage in this pastoral planning process and have conversations with different individuals, you or I might come across those that express this kind of anger. And we can assist them by acknowledging that, we can be angry. I see you're angry. Your parish, your faith must really mean a lot to you. What are we going to miss from our past reality? Maybe there's other things we won't really miss from our past. But we don't want to leave anger to be bottled up within. It's really unhealthy for us as individuals and for our parishes if we just kind of leave it inside and kind of just remain silent. And so it's okay to express that kind of anger and frustration, and to be able to work through, process the pain that we're feeling at the loss. A second response we can have towards loss is that of guilt. And guilt is something that's healthy. God's given to us to get us back on track when we recognize real wrongs, real sins that we've committed in our life that we have not yet been forgiven for. It should prompt us to recognize the wrong, to seek forgiveness and reconciliation, and to want to correct our behavior in the future. So healthy guilt is good, but it doesn't mean it's not still painful. In fact, guilt to the soul is kind of like what physical pain is to the body. Physical pain in our body points out to us something is wrong that needs to be fixed, whereas guilt points out that there's something wrong within our soul that needs to be forgiven. So how would guilt fit in with this pastoral planning process? Well, perhaps maybe we might feel guilt of not having put more effort into passing on the faith to our children in the past. And now maybe we see that they no longer practice, and it's a real sorrow in our life that we can feel guilt for. If only I'd done more, perhaps we wouldn't be where we are now with my children away from the faith and our parishes dwindling. Maybe it's guilt in specifically not advocating for the priesthood and religious life as a potential thing for my children. Maybe I even actively dissuaded them to even consider those vocations because I wanted grandchildren. Maybe it's guilt in failure to share the faith in a more public and meaningful way. Now, it's true that we can have good, real guilt for things we've actually done wrong, but it's also possible to have false guilt for things that we're not actually responsible for, right? Some of these current realities are beyond our control, that we're not fully responsible for some of those things happening, for that loss. So guilt needs to be properly evaluated. And one of the places we can do that is within the confessional, to bring what we're experiencing to the priest, and he can help us understand, what are we truly culpable of? What is really our responsibility and what is not? And we can even be helped to maybe move on to what can we do now? Instead of dwelling upon our failures in the past, what good thing can I do now? Maybe specifically, if I fail to evangelize my children and maybe I find that I can't really do much with them now, to reach out and evangelize others who may potentially be somebody else's children. And then maybe that they will then evangelize our own. Guilt is something that sometimes people experience after a loss, and we may experience that as well during this planning process. Next, we may experience anxiety and helplessness. Fear, anxiety for the future, not knowing what exactly will happen and feeling that we're not able to do anything about it. There's parts of this process that we're going through that aren't entirely clearly defined. Perhaps an analogy we could use is that we're trying to put a plane together while we're in flight. As priests, we have also different anxieties too about having to serve so many different communities, wanting to care for our people and feeling like, can I do this all? We don't want to fail. We don't want to mess things up. Like anger, anxiety can also be connected to that of helplessness. The thought that there's really nothing I can do to make things change, that we can't do much about the shifting demographics, that maybe we can't really do anything about the declining mass attendance and the priest availability. It also seems like we can't change that. Though there is a sense in which we can. Not if we continue to do things as we always have, but if we truly become missional parishes, then those things can change. And finally, just kind of an overall sadness. That's normal. To be sad in the face of a loss is perfectly normal, and so we should be sad about some of the various things that we may be losing as part of this process. But for us, it can be very helpful to not just keep all these things inside, all these emotions inside, but to share them with another person, to know that we're not alone. If you're feeling the loss of this process, your neighbor probably is too. To be able to talk through those things and to be able to process this pain of grief together. In further videos, we'll talk more about the role of prayer in being able to process pain, as well as the use of ritual. To conclude this video, I once again want to recognize that it's perfectly normal to mourn a loss and to take time to process the pain of grief.